Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. So today we want to talk about the ongoing missile war and the future of Russian weapon systems that will be used in this ongoing conflict. Now look, during World War II, one of the premier weapon systems that may have in fact won World War II was the T-34 main battle tank. Now there's some argument if you want to call this a main battle tank or a medium tank, what have you. The Russians manufactured these systems by the tens of thousands. The Germans were at awe in terms of the Russian manufacturing capability of these tanks. Not only that, it was a very good tank. The Germans obviously made very good tanks themselves. The Panther, the Tiger, the Panzer IV, Panzer III, and other self-propelled type guns as well. But the T-34 became the mainstay of the Soviet combat power, besides massive amounts of artillery. The deployment of thousands upon thousands of these systems had a dramatic impact on the course of the war. So what is the system in this current conflict that we would say is much like, in terms of impact on the course of the war, to the T-34? Now look, I may be getting a little bit carried away by stating this, but I wanted to compare and contrast two weapon systems. One, obviously the T-34, and then what could we compare the T-34 to in terms of weapons that the Russians are using in this conflict? Is it a tank? Is it an aircraft? Is it a helicopter? Is it a missile? Well, I would say it's none of those systems. I would say the most comparable system to the T-34 in terms of direct military impact is this system right here, the Lancet. So right now we believe the Russians are launching in excess of 300 Lancets per month. And this is steadily increasing. We have seen in the timeline and the use of the Lancet an increased use in this weapon system. Early in the war, we saw a few dozen being used. A few dozen turned into 100 a month, then 200 a month, and now in excess of 300 per month. So these 300 plus Lancet strikes every month that are occurring, they are destroying about 60% of the targets that they engage. And when I mean destroy, we believe that about 30% of the 300 plus Lancet strikes that are occurring, successful Lancet strikes, about 30% are in fact destroying the target completely. And then another 30% are seriously damaging the target that these Lancets are going after. And we're seeing new variations of the Lancet on the battlefield. Now, additionally, is the Russian missile war. At the onset of this conflict, and probably getting into the first 90 to 120 days of the conflict, the Ukrainians were talking about that the Russians were going to exhaust their supply of missiles. And what missiles are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the Iskander semi-ballistic cruise missile, and obviously the actual cruise missile system that can also be launched from the Iskander. We're talking about the KH-101, the Kinjal, the Killjoy. This is essentially a air-launched version of the Iskander semi-ballistic missile. The Zircon, a scramjet semi-hypersonic system that can be launched by both ship and ground-launched and air-launched systems. The Caliber, and then finally the P-800, Bastion, Onyx type of systems. So 120 days into this conflict, the Ukrainians were talking about that the Russians may have had about 100 systems remaining that were stockpiled. And we knew that not to be the case. And we also knew that the Russians were dramatically ramping up production. So where do we sit now? Well, it is believed that of all these systems, the Russians right now have stockpiled between 900 and 1,200 of these systems that I just showed you. And these are all these systems that I just talked about. Now, furthermore, Russian production capacity in these missile systems, these semi-ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, what have you, is continuing to increase. The Russian use, in terms of how many the Russians are using per month, is not really changing. But the stockpile of these systems is continuing to grow. It is believed that by 2025, or the middle of 2025, the Russians will have stockpiled in excess of 2,000 of these systems. So that would mean a couple of hundred stockpiled systems of each of these systems that I'm showing you now. Whether it's Iskander, KH-101, Caliber, Killjoy, Zircon, P-800. So why are the Russians stockpiling this amount of missiles? Why aren't they using this the entire batch of missiles that they are producing month in and month out? Well, the reason they're not using these systems, and they're curtailing the use of some of these systems, is they are preparing for a wider war with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They are contingency planning. It is also likely that the 2,000 plus missiles that I just talked about will in fact be closer to 3,000 missiles stockpiled by the Russians, of all systems just talked about. Now, these systems are also being upgraded. These systems are getting better. The Russians are learning what works and what doesn't work. Do these systems need bigger warheads? Do they need longer range? Do we make them more low observable? And that's what's happening. Then it's ongoing. Now, if the Russians believe that there is a possible conflict on the horizon, and look, I've talked about this very large military alliance between the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians, and we've not even talked about those countries' missile capacity in terms of production. The production capacity of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran right now vastly outpaces the production capacity of the United States. Now, could the United States ramp up and dramatically increase missile capacity? Absolutely. But the United States is not doing that. The Russians have entered this war footing where they are producing these systems at a wartime rate. And not only that, they are stockpiling these systems. They're probably using maybe a third to 25% of the actual missiles that are being produced each month. Those systems are being used on the battlefield. The rest are being stockpiled at sites throughout the Russian Federation. And the reason for that, again, contingency planning for World War III. They can see it. They, the Russians, can see a very large global conflict on the horizon, and they're preparing for it. Here in the United States, there's talk of drafting women. For the first time in the history of the United States, women may be drafted into the armed forces of the United States. That is the United States telegraphing something very traumatic is on the horizon. So again, I hope the beginning of this video is understanding. You understand my connection between the Lancet and obviously the T-34. It is a new age of warfare. The tank is no longer the king of the battlefield. The king of the battlefield right now in terms of this conflict are low-flying, loitering drones, kamikaze drones, attack drones. At the same time, high-quality missile systems. This is the king of the current battlefield. These are causing the most casualties. So I hope everybody enjoyed today's video. We'll be back with more content very, very soon. This was a late video. But again, as always, more to come. Thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.